Yeah. Okay. Right. Welcome to the Scrutiny Board Environment, Housing and Communities for February 2021. Hopefully, any members of the public who are looking in today find the agenda varied but also enjoyable in terms of what we've got before you today. So what I want to do first of all is just go through the initial items. So I'm going to pass over to Natasha, who will go through the first few items.
Thank you, Chair. So under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under agenda item number 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of the press and public. Under agenda item 3, there are no formal late items today. Under agenda item number 4, please can I ask that members declare any disclosable pecuniary interests?
Chair, can I come in? It's Councillor Khan. I'd like to declare I've got selective licensing property in Beeston. Thank you, Chair.
Sure.
Thank you. I'll note that down. Under agenda item number 5, apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Mulherin, and we have Councillor Dawson here as substitute.
Right.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Right. So can I start off first of all by thanking Councillor Harland, who has got promotion, and she will be missed from this particular board because of the experience and knowledge that she brought to this board, but I do wish her well. It's amazing how many people who have actually sat on my boards have gone on to be exec members. So if anybody's ambitious out there, you stand a very good chance of ending up on the exec board. So that's maybe, I don't know, that's an omen or a good thing or a bad thing. But and can I also thank Councillor Dawson for making himself available at short notice, because we didn't know officially until yesterday afternoon that Councillor Mulherin was permanently coming onto this board, but Councillor Dawson stepped in at the last minute. I asked him earlier on whether he was a pressed man or whether he was a volunteer, and he assures me he's a volunteer. So welcome, Councillor Dawson.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, right. In terms of the minutes, anybody got any points they would like to make about the minutes? Anything? Because the only point I've got to make is that under minute 78, the Scrutiny Board made some recommendations in terms of the budget, and we asked for information to be provided to all 99 councillors prior to the budget meeting on a number of areas. Unfortunately, that wasn't met, but that was part of a letter that was sent by all Scrutiny chairs to Victoria Bradshaw, setting out the take of the various Scrutiny chairs on the good and the bad things that happened during the budget process this year. So with that said, are you happy to accept the minutes as they are? Yep, good, that's fine. So,
Chair, can I just come in, Chair? It might be Councillor Walshaw. You're not muted. There's the beeping keeps coming on when you're speaking. Councillor Walshaw, yeah, that's it.
That's it. Okay, thank you. Right. So before we go in, what we'll do now is I was just about to welcome Councillor Hayden, who isn't actually dealing with this first item, but Councillor Hayden has been given promotion as well. She's now in charge of, well, just about everything I think you've got some responsibility for, because climate change and transport cross over our life in many ways, as does planning. So can I welcome Councillor Hayden to this, her first meeting in her capacity as the executive member, although she has attended this in the past when she's come along. So welcome, Councillor Hayden.
Thank you, Chair.
So what I want to do now is I'll go around the room and everybody to introduce themselves so that everybody knows. So I'm Councillor Barry Anderson. I chair this Scrutiny Board and I represent Adlin Wharfdale. So the next person is Councillor Akhtar.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Javed Akhtar, represent London Woodhouse and City Centre.
Councillor Bentley.
Good morning, Jonathan Bentley. I'm councillor for Wheatwood.
Is Councillor Blackburn in the call? Can't see her.
Yes, I
Oh,
am.
you are. Sorry, you are. Right. Do you want to introduce yourself, Anne?
Councillor Anne Blackburn, Family Wortley Ward.
Councillor Brooks.
Councillor Kaylee Brooks, Little London, Woodhouse and City Centre.
Councillor Collins.
Councillor Dawn Collins, Horsforth Ward.
Councillor Dawson.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Neil Dawson, representing Morley South Ward and substitute, as you said earlier, for Councillor Mulherron.
And I think Councillor Dobson's had to go to another meeting, but he will be back in again later on. Councillor Gabriel.
Good morning all, Angela Gabriel, Beeston and Holbeck Ward.
Councillor Graham.
Morning, everybody. Councillor Pauline Graham, Crossgates and Winmore Ward, and I've been with the chair for as long as he's been the Scrutiny Board Chair, and I love it. Thank you.
Councillor Gruen.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Peter Gruen, also Crossgates and Winmore Ward.
Councillor Khan.
Sonny, good morning. Councillor Asker Khan for Bermondshots and Richmond Hill.
Councillor Sharp.
Morning, everyone. Councillor Nicole Sharp for the Temple Newton Ward.
And last but by no means least, Councillor Smith.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Trish Smith. I represent the Putty Ward.
These are the people who are actually on the scrutiny board today. We have a number of guests, both officers and external people. So, Councillor Cooper.
Yes, good morning, everybody. It's nice to see you all. I'm Councillor Deborah Cooper. I'm the Executive Board Member for Communities and Deputy Leader. And I think, along with Councillor Pauline Graham, I've been on this board in a number of forms, I've got to say. So it's still good to be here.
Yep. Mr. Evans.
Neil Evans, Director of Resources and Housing. I think I've been to this board quite a lot as well.
Mark Ireland.
Morning, everybody. Mark Ireland. I'm private sector housing. Leeds Council.
Gerard Tinsdale.
Good morning, everybody. Gerard Tinsdale. I'm currently acting Chief Officer for Housing Leeds.
And Mr. Gavin Dick.
Good morning. My name's Gavin Dick. I work for the National Residential Landlord Association.
Thank you and welcome to today's meeting. I'll introduce some other guests when we get to the next item. So, Mr. Ireland, over to yourself to present this item. Mark, do you want questions throughout or do you want people to retain their questions until the end of the presentation?
At the end would be useful if that's okay.
That's fine. That's fine if everyone can do that. Thank you. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you. I'll see if I can share my screen. Can everybody see that?
No. Sorry.
No.
No, sorry.
Yeah. Try again. Shit.
There we are. Yep.
Thank
if you just start your
There we go.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Morning, everybody. What I'm going to do is just run through a presentation that covers some of the items that we've put in the paper to you. I don't intend to go through the paper, but just cover some of the main issues that we've put in there. In terms of the private rented sector in the cities, we've reported a number of times. It's around 20% of the market. It's grown significantly over the last 10 years, 15 years. What we've seen is that most of that increase has been in the actual inner city parts, places like Hare Hills, Beeston, Armley. We've seen areas such as those increase from 15, 20% 10 years ago up to 50 plus% of the market in what is now the predominant tenure in there. I have to say that most of the markets in the city provide good quality accommodation. It's high value, doesn't necessarily come across our desk in terms of people having issues with it. Poorest qualities you'd expect is in the inner city, where we've seen the biggest increase, and most of the private rented sector, or the majority of it, is actually still within the pre-1919 stock. In terms of our vision, it's a bit wordy. We are talking to colleagues in communications to try and get this a bit snappier, but basically it's to support landlords and owner occupiers to have good quality homes, improving the outcomes for tenants and communities, and targeting those landlords who fail to comply with their duty, as well as targeting proactively empty homes to bring them back into use as part of the affordable homes for those in need. How do we do that? We work with good landlords. One of the ways we do that is via the Leeds rental standard, and Gavin, who is here to contribute to the discussion later, is actually chair of that board, of which we sit on. We have a seat on. We've signed up to the Leeds rental standard. Councillor Cooper signed on behalf of the council a few years ago, and it is one of the I think it's the only self-regulating offer from a city to the sector in the country, but Gavin may be able to confirm that. We target landlords who fail in their legal obligation, and we take whatever legal action we can to make sure that they do. We proactively target properties. That's on an individual intelligence basis and on an area by area basis. We're currently working in Homelessness, which I'll describe later. The aim is to cross the threshold and make a difference to people's lives. We've implemented selective licensing currently in Beeston and Hare Hills. We obviously will consider future options for these based on business cases and supporting the local agenda. We proactively target empty homes, which I've said, with the aim of bringing them back into use to support the housing need. And we actively support homelessness prevention, working with colleagues in Leeds Housing Options to find people good quality homes within the sector as part of the offer that we make people in the city. Leeds rental standard, as I said earlier, it's self-regulation of the sector by the sector. We're supportive of it. It is run by the sector. Gavin, as I say, chairs it.
Are you there, Mark?
Yeah, am I still here?
Yeah, you paused a bit. On you go, it's okay.
Sorry, thank you. So self-regulation of the sector by the sector, they check themselves, make sure they're compliant. The only time we get involved is if there's any disputes where they can't be resolved, and we will then go straight to formal action if appropriate. There's currently around 483 members of that scheme, and they rent roughly 40,500 bed spaces within the sector. So it's quite a large number of bed spaces that are currently covered by that. We obviously have a reactive offer where people complain to us, and we will go out and deal with issues that arise. We've obviously had a limited ability during COVID. We've followed the government guidelines whereby we've tried to address things that are issues remotely without visiting. We have visited where we've had to. We've obviously followed government guidance and safety. We have our own risk assessment to ensure that everybody's remained safe. We've still managed to do over 1,000 inspections of one sort or another, managed to serve 795 notices, and we've benefited as a result of our intervention around 1,800 people. Most of those benefits, I will say, as a result of action pre-COVID rather than during COVID, as a result of the time lag from us being involved. It is less than what we normally do. A lot of what we've had to do, we've had to work and try and resolve things without visiting. We've probably done 2.5 times that number of inspections by now in the year and served considerably more notices. But still a very good effort given where we are with the pandemic. HMOs, we still have around 3,000 HMOs that are licensed at any one time in the city. This time next year, we'll be gearing up for phase 4 of HMO licensing. Within about a 3-4 month period, we'll be licensing 2,500 properties. So that's a massive ask for us. We're continuing to proactively target poor HMOs. We have a team, as we said last time we came, that actually looks at properties that have been overcrowded, overdeveloped, that are being used to house vulnerable people who have very small space, and we've served an awful lot of prohibition orders as a result. We've worked with others on space standards, and we hope to publish our guidance in the near future. We've consulted on that. We've also worked with people like Lord Best and Julia Parks on this, and part of that work hopefully will result in, from April, all permitted developments have to take into account space standards moving forward. Currently they don't. Planning are also consulting currently on an SPD on space, and we'll wait the outcome of that, but that will be mainly for new development, not existing developments. Road landlord unit, in the last 12 months, this has actually started to have, in my opinion, more fruitful benefits. We've started to develop better partnerships with the police and others to actually target criminal landlords. We've seconded someone into the service who has a background in human trafficking, modern slavery, who's got better links with the police, so we've got better shared intel and we're improving outcomes. We've recently had a few successful raids where we've managed to target something like 11 privately rented properties and remove £1.25 million worth of cannabis plants. We've also had an operation where we've targeted a landlord that was known to us for a number of years, and is currently going under investigation for human trafficking, where they're exploiting vulnerable people, not just for work but also for financial gain. And we're able to find, well, the police found significant numbers of bank cards and other things and that's currently being, he's currently in army awaiting trial. Leeds neighbourhood approach, we've continued to proactively target properties in the area, again limited because of COVID. We've still managed to do 180 inspections within Homelessness since March. We've returned 60 long-term empties. We're working with Leeds Fed on the bottom end of Homelessness, where they have significant numbers of properties, and looking at how we can improve that area. Our next step will obviously to have an exit plan for Homelessness so we can move staff into Beeston and Hare Hills and continue the work there that we've been doing in Homelessness linked to selective licensing. In terms of selective licensing, it was designated January last year. So far across both areas, we've had just over 5,400 licenses that have been applied for. We said in the paper that 85%, I think, had paid their fee by December. It's now up to 95% as of yesterday. And we've now started issuing draft and final licenses and received the second part of the payment for a number of final licenses now. However, we still estimate there's around 1,000 properties that could require licensing that remain unlicensed. It's limited to what we were able to do because of COVID, because a lot of that is proactive, but we have managed to commence 52 formal investigations as a result of coming across properties from one way or another that we believe are being let without licenses. So far, of those 52, 36 have resulted in us looking at issuing or have issued civil penalty notices. The remaining ones are currently under investigation with a view to determine whether we have the public and evidential tests met, and if they do, they will follow the same path. And we currently have 15 awaiting further investigation. We're aware that there will be more following, and we do find more on a daily basis, and we continue to just investigate them as and when we can. In terms of homelessness prevention, we work with colleagues in LHO, Leeds Housing Options, to support tenants into the private rented sector. We support landlords, we help with bonds, we provide things like damage liabilities, and we provide support to tenants and landlords when we put people in to their homes. We have an ongoing promotional campaign. We've set up a Facebook campaign to try and encourage more landlords to join that scheme so that we can provide more homes for people within the sector. Between March and December, we just under 500 new tenancies were created through that process, which is not a bad achievement, considering I think every year it's about 5,000 LCC tenancies are created. So it's around 10% of what we create in our own market, in our own stock. Finally, empty homes. Empty homes are part of the core planning strategy. We said in March 2012 we'd reduce it by over 2,000. Currently, we've managed to reduce it by over 2,200 to March last year, and we've continually maintained it below that target that we set within the core planning strategy. What we have seen during COVID, interestingly, is we've seen a slight increase in the number of long-term empties in the city centre and in the student markets, whereas all other markets appear to be acting as in the same as previous years. So that's my presentation, Chair. So I'm happy for questions.
Right. If you can restore, that's it. Brilliant. Thank you. Right. So questions. Anybody like to open the batting? I know that Councillor Gruen has a question. Do you want to go first, Councillor Gruen?
I'm happy to go now. Thank you, Chair. Mark, thank you for your presentation. I remember us working together, and you've got a very good team, and you are very hardworking. And as colleagues can see, there's a lot of demand on the team. Some of the statistics have changed a lot. I mean, I was really surprised about the Beeston area, that the numbers have grown almost exponentially. And so it's very important, the kind of work that you do. But my question is this: you rightly draw out that the poorest conditions are to be found in those inner city communities where there is most deprivation and most poverty. And so being aware of that and paying attention to it, do you think, in your professional view, that you've been given, not by the council, but by legislation, sufficient authority and powers to take the action that needs to be taken? If not, what do you think would help you most so that the Scrutiny Board might be able to bat on your behalf? Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. In terms of legislation available, we have considerable. We have an awful lot, and in 2016, the Housing and Planning Act gave us even more, gave us the ability to have the civil penalties, which have been very useful. I think for me personally, we've got an awful lot of legislation. The issue for me, really, and it always has been, is we don't actually know where the sector is. There's no ability to know which property is privately rented, which one isn't. So as you say, we've seen a massive increase in certain areas of the city, but we don't actually know which property is rented, which property is owner occupied. So there's no actual means to go and undertake whatever action we need unless someone comes to us. In terms of the legislation we specifically have, one of the anomalies in the Housing Act is the need to serve notice and the need to actually have to go in before action. I'd fundamentally change that. There'd be bits and pieces I'd change in terms of selective licensing, in terms of how you do the business case. But one of the things we've always lobbied for as a council is we would, and have done, welcome if we would license the sector as a whole. I'm sure Gavin would not agree with us, but we've always lobbied that if you're going to provide someone with what is basically their home, then there should be more control and it should be licensed, and that license should have minimum conditions. And that's been the position of the authority for a number of years. I think it was the position when, as you say, you looked after us, and remains the same now.
Thank you very much. Only a brief comment, Chair, perhaps we can come back to that at the end when you summarise what actions we might take.
Yep, that's fine. Thank you. Right, I've got Councillor Smith, then Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mark. Excellent report. A lot of work gone in. You guys are clearly really, really busy, which is good and bad. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. Looks to be a huge challenge, which is clearly being hampered over the past 12 months with the COVID pandemic. So well done to you guys for carrying on. So I've got a couple of quick questions, I hope. So are there any plans to increase the selective licensing broader? I know you've said that about looking at the business cases, etc., but I didn't know whether you had any ideas where you might be going next, as it were. And the other question really is, how would you report a home to yourself, especially if you're a tenant? I've got a particular problem at the moment in my own ward, and I've asked the tenant to contact me to pass the details on because they're unable to find any way to contact yourselves and didn't even know that you existed, if I'm honest. So that'll be winging its way to you in due course, I'm sure. But just a couple of points, and thank you again.
Welcome. I think the authority has never said it won't do more. Where would be next would depend on for others to determine and whether or not we could base, in order to do additional licensing, be it HMO or selective, you're required to meet certain criteria that are laid down by the government. So wherever you went, you'd have to meet that criteria. You'd have to go through consultation, and it would have to be the most appropriate way to do that. At the moment, there's no areas that are identified as next. I think we need to, we have been delayed with COVID in terms of Beeston and Hare Hills. We're not where we would have ideally been if it hadn't had the pandemic. We've been restricted in terms of how to get into the office. So we need to get on with doing those two areas, get the licensings issued as soon as we possibly can, and hopefully, as part of the roadmap we've got from the government, get out and actually make a difference to people's lives by going and making sure they're living in good quality homes that are well managed in those two areas. In terms of access to the service, we were very fortunate in January that we got investment. We call it paper project, and the reason we call it paper project is the company that came in was called Paper, and they've reviewed some aspects of our service. They've looked at us externally, and one of the things that they've identified is that we need a better customer face. People need to be able to contact us better. We need to have a better profile, and that's some of the discovery that they've done, and we're currently working. We're very fortunate we've got some investment as a result. We're currently working with people, project manager and people from IT, to look at how we improve access to us, and also how we manage those people who do come to us and provide them with a better service, and they understand what we can and can't do in terms of expectations. So it's something we've recognised, if I'm honest, Councillor. It's something that we've been fortunate to have investment in, and we're currently working on hopefully improving that.
Okay, right. Now I've got Councillor Brooks, then Councillor Dawson, then Councillor Cann, then Councillor Bentley, and then if no other councillor has identified at that point, I'm then going to invite Mr. Dick to address us. So Councillor Brooks first, and then Councillor Dawson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mark, for that really interesting presentation. So you mentioned about the HMOs as a potential area for the empty homes programme, possibly. I was just wondering what the rules are around that. And also, oh yes, the 493 new tenancies, I just wanted to mention that under the LLS scheme. I think that deserves a lot of recognition. especially after, you know, like the year that we've had, like preventing 493 people going out into the street. Like that's fantastic work, and thank you for that.
Thank you, and I'll pass on your thanks, if you don't mind, to colleagues in LHO, because they do an awful lot of work on that as well. In terms of HMOs, we do, there's two things. One, we have mandatory licensing, and therefore we do compliance checks on that. But we also look at those that we come across where we either proactively find or have complaints around that are overcrowded, people are exploited, they're living in poor conditions, undersized rooms. People are using certain models to claim more from the public purse than perhaps the standard of accommodation justifies, or the type of accommodation justifies. So we have a proactive team that goes and does that, and as a result of that, what we might find is that we try and work with owners so they can reinvest in the properties, they can reconfigure it, they can still provide good quality homes for people, but they need to look at what they've got on the model as a result. What it can do is it can mean that some people need to move on, but there is legislation whereby we have to, it takes them out of the homelessness. It's specifically legislation that says we need to support them to find new homes, so we will use that to do that. At the moment, what we've found is the actual loss of homes is minimal. Landlords have tended to reconfigure and find ways of redeveloping their properties to make sure they're providing good quality accommodation. Does that answer your question?
I think that's very interesting, and thank you for your response. But I was asking specifically about HMOs that might be empty.
All right.
Period of time. Sorry if I weren't clear about that. So what sort of period of time must the HMO be empty for before it has to be put into a different use, like under the empty home scheme?
Oh, sorry. In terms of empty homes, we take the target of 6 months, and then we have a strategy depending upon what the owner wants to do. So we have, if you like, a spectrum which starts off of we will support them, we will help them, we will encourage them to bring the property back into use, or we'll encourage them to sell them, and we work with someone called the Empty Homes Doctor, who is a partner who can literally hold someone's hand through the process to bring them back into occupation, all the way through to those that don't do anything. We might end up CPOing, compulsory purchasing, if they don't bring it back in. But obviously that's a long-term process and is very expensive, and something we have to do as a last resort. But we do it, and we've done it on a number of occasions. So we have that spectrum, and in between we will say encourage them, we will look at them, we'll take whatever necessary action we do need to make sure it's not blighting the community. We will encourage the owner to bring it back in. We'll work in partnership with the Empty Homes Doctor. But ultimately the far end of that is compulsory purchase, and if need be, we will then look at how we bring that property back into use. Some of them come into our stock, some of them go into auction, but they go into auction with a caveat of you have X number of months, depending on what it is, to bring that property back into use, or we'll take it back off you. So we have that mechanism from the point of 6 months where we will write to everybody, all the way through to after a few years, if you haven't done anything, we'll compulsory purchase it. And that's regardless of whether it's an HMO or single household or what. It's if it's an empty dwelling.
Good. Councillor Brooks has indicated that she's happy with that answer. Right, so I've got Councillor Dawson, Councillor Cann, Councillor Bentley, then it'll be Councillor Blackburn, and then Dick. So Councillor Dawson, then Councillor Cann.
Thank you, Chair. Mark, thank you for that response just now. My question is on a similar issue on the empty homes. I note that, I think it's very good news that the number has reduced quite dramatically, but there are still 3,500 empty homes at the end of March. And it's in no one's interest to have a house that's empty. And my question was going to be, and I think you might have just partially answered it, how can we help or incentivise landlords to let their properties? I mean, it's in their interests as well as ours. And I suppose the other question I was going to ask is, do we keep a record of how long homes might be empty for? I mean, you mentioned in the report 3,500 at the end of March, but have they been empty for a long period, or are they just recently coming onto the market?
In terms of incentivise, as I've said previously, yes. We work very closely, as I say, with the Empty Homes Doctor, and they're able to act independently of us. They're able to work with owners directly, with either contractors, to find contractors, get them help to do the properties up. We do offer 2 loans for people. We offer an equity release loan whereby you can borrow up to £30,000 and you pay that back over, well, you have 5 years to pay it back, and there's interest on that. We also have a smaller £5,000 personal loan where you can borrow £5,000 and you can then use that for whatever reason, decoration, white goods or whatever, to allow your property to be used, or bring it back into sort of a habitable use. Can be used for carpets, whatever you need. In terms of incentivise, say, Empty Homes Doctor are able to broker deals for them. They can help people get their properties into auctions. They can do all those sort of things we can't do. In terms of records of empty homes, yes, we do. We know when an empty home first became empty. We get that from council tax. We get that on a monthly basis, so we keep a record of which ones are empty. It's a churn. It changes. Yes, there are some that go on to 1, 2, 3 years. The owners tend to have other issues that mean that they're not acting, or they're not bringing them back in. Hence, we might end up with CPOing them. But we do know, and it does, as I say, it churns. You do need a number of empty properties, though, in the city for your housing market to operate. Normally, what we have there is about just under 1% of the stock is long-term empty, and very little. Sorry, that's someone at my door and my dog announcing it. There is significant numbers that have been reduced. I would suspect that 3,500 is about the level that we're going to get it to, and I don't think we'll get it to much lower than 3,000. We never have. I think the lowest we've ever had it once, 2,900 and something, and we managed that for 1 month. The rest of it has been about 3,000 to 3,500 consistently.
Thank you, Mark.
Mark, serious, do you need to deal with your dog, or is it going to? No, are we okay? That's right.
Mandy will sort it, hopefully.
Right. Councillor Khan, then Councillor Bentley, then Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you, Chair. And Mark, can I also say thank you for your excellent report and presentation. And I want to say a massive thank you to you and your team, for responsive when inquiry comes from our residents, and your prompt response, and your assurance does help the residents, and thank you for that. My question's partly been asked by Councillor Dawson is regarding empty properties. We've got over 20,000 people on our waiting list, council waiting list, and it's good to see that you said 3,500 properties being reduced. My question is, do we have any breakdown of the ward by ward, which ward has the highest empty properties, so we can work with you, Mark, and if we can have a table, breakdown of those properties in the wards, then we can work locally with yourself and see how we can help you to get those properties back in use.
We have ward by ward data, and we monitor it. We've had the data since 2012, so we've been able to manage and monitor trends. We do get it, we do produce it in data per ward. What we've seen is there has been a slight increase over the last 12 months, predominantly due to COVID, we think. And what we've seen is the biggest increases is currently in the city centre flats and that type of accommodation, and within the student market. So the biggest rises, 86% of those of what's increased over that time as in those two markets. So it's Hunslet and Riverside, Headingley and Hyde Park are the ones that every other ward has fluctuated and is roughly where we'd expect it to be based on what we know from the trends, Councillor. But we can share that data with you. I'm more than happy to do that.
Good. Okay. Right. I noticed that Mr. Evans had indicated he wanted to come in. Do you still want to come in, Neil?
I was just going to say, in terms of the Councillor Dawson inquiry, one of the other factors has been the fact that we charge double council tax if they've been empty for more than 2 years. That's something which is now allowed by government. Not all councils do it, but we do. And obviously that kind of concentrates minds a bit as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Right, Councillor Bentley, then Councillor Blackburn, and then I'll be inviting Mr. Dick to address us.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mark. As colleagues have said, excellent report, and for all you do. A few points, some of which we've discussed, so I'll just mention very briefly. I'm really pleased that you're doing more work to raise your profile, because I think, if I can use the word, you are one of the best kept secrets in the housing community, and it's a great pity, because had I've been on this, if we're talking about how long we've been on the board, I've been on this board since I was a councillor 8 years ago, and had I not been and not had a special interest in housing, I probably wouldn't have known of your existence. And I think there's a feeling that, well, private rented, that's nothing to do with the council. It's not a council house, it's private, and there's nothing that we can do about it. And so I'm really pleased you're sort of going to make yourself more noticeable to everybody. I don't know if there's any, this is probably just something you have a feel for rather than numbers, and it might be an unfair question, but is there any evidence or any about landlords moving properties to areas where there isn't selective licensing, or when they buy new properties or invest in different properties, they're doing that in unlicensed areas? And that really brings me on to the third point about, I'm a firm believer, if we're going to have licensing, we should have it across the whole city, we should have it across the whole area. And whenever I mention this, a lot of barriers are put up to it, having to have the consultation and the business case and everything else. So I think coming back to Councillor Gruen's point, we said, what can we do about it as an authority and as a scrutiny board? And I wonder how much lobbying, if any, is done by you specifically and the council generally to try to change that legislation or get people to understand that legislation. I know, for example, in Nottingham, where I'll declare, it's not really declaring an interest, but I do have a property in Nottingham for historic reasons, and that is virtually the whole of the city has got selective licensing, including the parts where we would think, well, you don't need it there because they're, high value, high rent flats, but they still have licensing, and all landlords are compelled to comply with the regulations and pay for it through a license. It might be something that Mr. Dick wants to comment about as well when he speaks. Thanks so much.
Your first question, at the moment, there doesn't appear to be a shift out of the selective licensing areas. We had one in Cross Green, of vastly smaller areas than what we've got in Hills and Beeston, and we didn't see a movement out of that area. What we did see was a movement of some landlords into the area because they thought that it was going to be up and coming and we were going to invest in it. We have no empirical evidence or have no numbers or nothing. That's just simply a feeling at the moment. We've not seen it. But unfortunately, with COVID, we've not been out and about, so we've not got that feel that we would normally have if we were out and about. But it is something that we were conscious of when we drew the business case together, that there is always that potential, and it's something we will try and monitor and see if it does have an impact. And but at the moment, I say it's not something we've been able to do. In terms of licensing across the city, for us as a city, and looking at the areas and the markets and what we've got and the criteria that we have in the city, the criteria we have for licensing or addition, be it selective or additional HMO licensing, we would struggle to make a business case that would stand up to scrutiny for a lot of the areas, other than some of those that we're already looking at and potentially similar areas that we've described in the report. You would probably struggle to get selective licensing across the city. Nottingham's slightly different. I know David in Nottingham and on the business case. The areas and what they've been able to do is different because their market's different. What I understood as Nottingham turns out not to be Nottingham City Council. If you like, a lot of the affluent areas or the better quality homes are actually outside of Nottingham City Council's boundary, and therefore if you look at them in the same way as you look at Leeds, they couldn't do this. They couldn't have selective licensing across the same sort of housing stock if you looked at it and put them all, the different local authorities together, which would constitute a similar housing stock that we have as a single city. So I don't think we could make a case for extending selective licensing to across the city as a whole, unfortunately. Hence, we do lobby government, we lobby them regularly. We are very fortunate in the sense that we're one of the authorities that government comes to. When we had the 2016 Housing and Planning Act, they came and we contributed an awful lot to the guidance, and we were part of working groups for that. And we've continued that relationship, and it's not just with the enforcement, we've also got it in relation to things like carbon reduction and what have you, where they've just consulted and we've been part of that consultation and asked to comment on things. So we have a very good relationship with government, and we do lobby them all the time. I have to admit that when we got the Housing and Planning Act, it wasn't something that I thought we would get from the government at the time, but they gave us that. We have and continue to make our position clear as a local authority that our view is that the sector should be licensed, should have minimum standards, and because ultimately you're providing someone with a home. Not everyone will agree with that, not every other local authority agrees with that, but that's been the position of Leeds when we've been asked for our opinion, and we will continue to lobby for that.
Okay.
That's great. Thanks very much, Mark.
Right. Councillor Blackburn.
Yes, Chair.
Do you want to ask your question? You're muted again, Anne.
Yes, I do. I'd like to thank Mark for his report. It's very comprehensive, makes interesting reading, and obviously, despite COVID, him and his team have been very busy. I would like to know if there is a list somewhere of private housing, empty, available private housing that people can get hold of who's looking for it. In other words, if there's lots of people out there that, as you say, yes, are overcrowded, but they're not going to stand much chance of getting the council house for some time because they're just not, high enough priority. But there doesn't seem to be a list. A person's left to find where these private landlords are, and I just wondered if there is somewhere that you could guide me on this. Is there one list where we can say, look, we know that those houses are up to our standards, and this is what we recommend you use? Thank you.
There is limit to what data we can provide in the public domain in relation to empty properties. We are able to provide anonymised information, so we can say how many is per ward, the numbers, things like that. The only list we can provide that gives details of individual properties are those that belong to companies or ourselves or housing associations, which we have been putting on the Leeds data mill. What we can't provide is a list of properties that are owned by individuals. We've considered it, we've looked at it, but due to IG and data protection, we're not able to provide that in the public domain, unfortunately.
Okay.
Sorry, look, can I come back in,
Yeah.
Chair?
Yes.
What I was referring to is houses that are owned by private landlords that they are advertising. But how does the people out there find out about it? Because, you know, unless it seems to be up to them to find a private let. But how do you do that? And how do we know that the private let that the find is one that's that has a suitable, reputable landlord?
In simple terms, someone looking for a house, it's a interaction between you and the landlord, and we could know, and in the vast majority of cases, we won't be party to any of that transaction and we won't know anything about it. What we do though is where we talked about the LLS system, where we help people into the private rented sector. Part of that process is that we will go out and inspect the property if they want a bond from us or they're looking for being part of it, and one may have to claim damage liability and other things. And we will go and inspect it. We'll make sure the providers with the right certification, so we get the right gas, electric certificates. We will tell them the works that they need to be done. If they don't do them, what we do is we keep a list of those that we know are unsuitable and have come to us, and we will go back and proactively inspect them as part of other functions within the service. But what's very, very successful, and one of the things we want to do to improve the private rented sector and work with it, is that if we are going to place someone in a private property, we as a council have inspected it and we're comfortable that that property meets the legal minimum.
Okay, right. Gerard, as in Gerard Tinsdale, you indicated you want to come in on this issue.
Yeah, it was just briefly. Mark picked up the main points in terms of how we ensure the allocations are positive for people. But picking up on Councillor Blackburn's comments about how do people that are looking to secure private rented accommodation find out what's out there. Council, we've got a dedicated team within Leeds Housing Options now that solely works on linking landlords with people that are willing to take private rented accommodation. We've got a number of accredited landlords that we work with. We'll contact those on behalf of the customer and see if they've got available properties within the area, then link them into Mark's team so he can carry out the inspections that he's just referred to. And we also recommend that people just use some of the websites that are out there, like Rightmove, for example, to look for private rented accommodation that's available in the area. But those people that are struggling to find it, we've got a team that will support them and help them to do that where we can.
Thank you. Right, I'm now going to invite Mr. Dick if he's any observations he would like to make. And I know that Mark isn't a sensitive soul, so if you want to criticise him, you can do so.
Thank you, Councillor. I wouldn't dare criticise Mark. I just beg your pardon, make us better. I think you raised quite a few issues, and I think just to comment on selective licensing, we didn't oppose the council's selective licensing, and we think the council, albeit with COVID having a massive implication, is doing the right approach, which is targeting an area to actually deliver it. What I have seen elsewhere in the country, to give comparison, the councils have gone for citywide schemes. They haven't actually put the resources into actually targeting where the problems actually are. It's more just to go faster stripe on the side of the council. To put it in perspective, certain councils, I would say in London, haven't actually inspected all those properties within the licensing scheme after 5 years. So there's no point really having a licensing scheme just to say you've got a licensing scheme. You've actually got to do the work and deliver against it, which is to root out the criminals, the poor properties, and actually basically make the private rented sector better for those that are living in it. I think that's the key criteria you need to put against selective licensing or additional licensing or even mandatory licensing. It's the inspection regime that you put in place and what you do with those that have got poor substandard housing and how you remove those from the sector and actually give tenants a better property experience, if that's the term. In relation to, again, just in citywide schemes, the government haven't actually approved any since 2015. Even Newham had to take out certain parts, and there is the exception of Dagenham and Redbridge. Redbridge didn't get theirs. So I think you've got to look at it now. The other part I would put in, I do sit on a panel with both Leeds, Liverpool and Manchester, and I do think you need to do a comparison to show actually Leeds is actually doing reasonably well in comparison to those two other cities. If you look at them as peers, both in tackling homelessness and in actually tackling a lot of the issues within the housing sector, you genuinely do know where your housing situation is in comparison to those two cities. The other areas I just want to highlight is the challenges the PRS has got going forward. And I think they are significant and will pose a massive challenge, not just to Leeds, but across the whole of the United Kingdom. The first one is what happens post-COVID. Where do people want to live? With an increase in home working, people are looking to leave city centre living to a certain extent. They're looking more to have gardens, looking more to have basically live more in the countryside. We have noticed that. There's various reports floating around at the moment already. London has seen somewhere between 8 and 10% population decrease. Put in comparison, that's around just under 1 million people have left London already. So the city centre of Leeds will have that challenge. There's already indication in the student market within Leeds that people aren't looking for the city centre, looking much more for the outer parts of Leeds to live in. The second part of that would then be what happens to those tenants who are falling behind on rent, have built up debt, and how are they going to get out of that whole area. As some of you will have seen, we believe government should intervene and help write off some of that debt so that people aren't carrying debt in the future, because that will go against them, especially with the Renters Reform Bill coming through, which will have a significant impact on those with negative credit ratings going forward. But the big elephant, and I know it leads on to a second part you're having later on, is the change to MEES, minimum energy efficiency standards. Again, something we have been supporting. The change that is proposed that from 2025, all new tenancies, April 25, will be a C. It will pose a significant challenge for all parts of the United Kingdom, specifically around pre-1919 build of single skin. You're going to have to look at this. There's certain things I've always been advocating for. I'll repeat again. We think where there's conservation areas, planning permission should be set so that people can apply, can get the refurbishment work without having to seek a new planning application. So predetermined planning, what is acceptable in those areas, needs to be approved first, so that landlords and homeowners can take full use of things like the Green Homes Grant, because currently you can only apply within 12 weeks. A planning application takes excess of 12 weeks. So there's quite a bit of work that can be done to support both the private rental sector and homeowners to hit that target, because that will be a significant game changer for a lot of the housing stock, not just in Leeds, but across the whole United Kingdom. So that's my opening comments for you too.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody get any comments on those? Right. What I'm planning to do is now to invite Councillor Cooper if she's anything she would like to say, and then I'll try and sum up the debate and how we're going to move it forward. So Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks to Mark. And I have to say, his various teams. He doesn't just have one team working with him. Actually, he's got quite a number of teams these days. We've certainly grown that part of our housing capacity, I've got to say, within the council over the recent years. And through Mark's presentation, you will understand why that's needed, because of the private rented market has overtaken the amount of housing in the city that's delivered through the private rented market now has overtaken the council's own number of housing stock as well. So of course we need lots of different networks and partnerships and ways of that we can work with that sector to enable that we get good quality housing throughout the whole of that sector. And Mark's outlined a number of ways that we're doing that. And a couple of scrutiny members picked up on a few points around selective licensing. Hopefully that's been answered as to why the areas were chosen that we have got selective licensing in. But that's not, the end of the matter with selective licensing as far as we're concerned. We want to do more, and we will, continue to try and do that. But as Mark said, we need to have the right business case for those areas to enable that any application for selective licensing is successful. But we do continue to lobby ministers on this issue about selective licensing continually. Have to say, some of the scrutiny board members' comments that they didn't know the existence, I found quite surprising, I've got to say. And I do think to myself, that if you actually read some of the executive board reports that I've taken to executive board, if occasionally you might listen to me in council when I'm speaking, because I'm always talking about housing and the various elements of housing within the city, including the private rented sector. And indeed, I think I once spoke for around 20 minutes on all the various elements of housing in council. So I'm very surprised that elected members have not heard of it before. And also, I send out emails on a regular basis with updates when there are any changes. And the most recent would have been around the selective licensing, how we paused it. There are also updates that go out on the weekly briefing from the COVID report from the leader and Mariana. So can I just suggest that elected members maybe read some of the papers, and you might find the useful information in there. And also the information about the good work that we're doing as well. So I think, and I'd just like to finish really with saying that thank you to Gavin for his positive comments about what we're doing in Leeds. And I know that we've met Gavin. Gavin's part of the networks that we engage with around private rented sector in the city. He often comes to our strategic housing board, and as well as does Councillor Barry Anderson, who's your scrutiny chair today, and a number of other councillors who sit on this board are also part of that strategic housing board. So where we discuss lots of different areas of housing, including the private rented sector. So maybe a suggestion, Councillor Anderson, might be that you might want to take an update of the work from the Strategic Housing Board when we get up and running again after COVID to Scrutiny in the future. I know we're coming to the end of the Scrutiny municipal year, but it might be a thought for you know, using your time further in the next year, maybe. Although I do know that time is very precious for the Scrutiny Board, and you do have many other things that you need to look at too. But can I just thank Mark and his various teams, all the staff that he works with, to ensure that we've got the best possible quality housing under the private rented sector in the city. So thanks, Chair.
Thank you, thank you. So to try and sum up this, I mean, Mark, joking aside, I mean, I've known Mark for a while. Mark runs an excellent team, and he's got a lot of good people underneath him. And actually recently, he's lost one or two people who have been vital to the service in the past. And as a result of that, Mark has had to take up the baton and get, you know, more and more involved, as has the rest of his team, to get things going. I think I mean, I'm someone who is immersed in housing, and this is an exemplar department. This is one that is very customer facing. They are helpful to elected members when you ask them for help. They are hard on some of the landlords that do cause problems in this city, and they don't shirk from taking some of that action, so we can be reassured in that respect. What is interesting, we maybe need to look at in the future, is what is the role of private housing in meeting the housing needs of the city later on. I know from a conversation I had with Gerald Tinsdale that that's one of the areas he highlighted to me in a briefing he gave me when he was outlining his strategy for housing in the city, is the role that the private rented sector will have in meeting housing needs. And I think that's been brought out by a number of members today. We also need to look at where next in the city, where next is selective licensing potentially going to go. So I think that's something as the successor Scrutiny Board may wish to look into. There's also the issue of resourcing. One, resourcing of Mark and his team, but also resourcing in terms of what is available to landlords to help them upgrade their premises and bring them up, you know, in terms of grants or loans or whatever financial mechanisms. That's another area I would say that as a Scrutiny Board, we might want to have an interest in as to how that can be achieved. We also need to look at the effectiveness of the legislation and what more we could do to try and maybe the Scrutiny Board to effectively, if we're not happy with something, to come up with a joint letter along with Councillor Cooper that we could write down to the Minister expressing views and concerns, because that will, I certainly do believe that that adds weight when a scrutiny function can look at things dispassionately and come up with views. There's also going to be a lot of work, because once on homelessness, once we come out of the post-pandemic area, what is the government going to do with homelessness? They have put a lot of money into it. The council have done a fantastic job in terms of the number of people who are currently homeless in the city. But when we get back to norm, whatever norm actually means, is there going to be the same priority on it nationally? And as such, how are we going to deal with it? I think that's something we need to look at as a board. And also, I think we need to keep an eye on the breakdown of empty properties throughout the city and where issues may be occurring and what more could be done to stimulate markets there. And probably the last two things, one Councillor Cooper brought up was getting an update on the Strategic Housing Board and what it is doing and what recommendations it's made. But probably most importantly were the comments made by Mr. Dick in terms of the forthcoming challenges the sector is going to have to face up to in the post-COVID world, as to how it's going to affect. And it was quite interesting when we were talking about the student accommodation, because we've had a lot of purpose-built student accommodation in the city, which means that the basic laws of supply and demand would mean that some of the housing that we do have at the moment set aside for student accommodation, is that going to be needed? If it isn't going to be needed, what is it going to be used for? What are the landlords' views going to be if they suddenly are invited to start to take standard housing tenants as opposed to students? Because my understanding is a lot of the student accommodation is of very high quality, because students just will not take low standard housing. And so there are some good houses out there if the landlords can be persuaded to put them on the market to meet some of our housing needs. Now, I know that Councillor Gruen mentioned earlier on when we were summing up, is there anything, Peter, that you would like to add in terms of areas that you would feel that the successor board might want to look into?
I think you've given a very fair summary, Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay. Councillor Gabriel.
Hi, one of the things that I think we should do, we were talking with Mark Island, and can I say how wonderful Mark Island's team is? And I've been on this board since it started, and I've worked with Mark Island for years, and lovely team. But one of the things that came out in the debate was the lack of where we know which is a council, which is a private property, and which is a landlord's property. And I would think that we could write to the government and ask if we could have. So when you get a house, you have to register it. And I think we should somehow get a formal structure that we then get a record of where every or most rented accommodation is. So then, like we complain, like we all have, this house is causing antisocial behaviour. Who does it belong to? And nobody knows. So I would really like to see us go forward and say we need a landlord's register.
Yeah, no, I think that's a valid point, because certainly as long as I've been involved in the housing, we've never ever really known as a city where all of the private rented properties are in terms, and who is a landlord, because some people might not even class themselves as a landlord. They've acquired a house and they don't always necessarily see themselves as landlords, and also the agents that are connected to the private rented sector as well, as to working with them to try and improve things overall. So anyway, I think we've had a good debate on that. Mark, please give your thanks to your team for the quality of work and the types of individuals that they are in terms of putting up with the vagaries of 90 odd councillors who have different needs in their particular areas. So thank you very much, Mark, and to Gerard and to Neil and to Councillor Cooper for the good work that has been done in this sector.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. So with that said, and also thank you to Mr. Dick for taking the time to come along today to give us, because when I was getting in the discussions I was having, I did feel it was important to get an outside view of Leeds, because we can be great at looking and saying how good we are, but it's nice to hear someone from outside pointing out that in peer terms, we do compare favourably, not necessarily the best, but that we compare favourably. So there are lessons to be learned, but thank you very much, Mr. Dick, for making the time to come along today. So if I can now move on to item 8, and can I ask certain people to formally introduce themselves? First of all, Councillor Hayden, who took over responsibility yesterday at Council. So, Councillor Hayden, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Oh, good morning. Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chair. Yes, my name's Helen Hayden, and I'm one of the councillors for Temple Newsome, alongside my wonderful colleague, Councillor Cooper and Councillor Sharp. Yes, as of yesterday, I've taken over the exec board role of from Councillor Mulheron of Climate Change, Transport and Sustainable Development. So yeah, it's exciting, a bit daunting, but exciting. So thank you very much for inviting me here today. And I'll pass over to my colleagues. Thank you.
Right. Councillor Walshaw, can you introduce yourself, please?
I can indeed. Thanks, Chair. I'm Councillor Neil Walshaw. I chair the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee and I chair the Development Plan Panel, and I represent Headingley and Hyde Park Ward.
Mr. Evans, do you want to reintroduce yourself as to what your role is in this, please?
Yeah, Neil Evans, Director of Resource and Housing, and I oversee Polly Cook's team that does much of the work on climate change.
And Polly Cook.
Hi, so I'm Polly, Chief Officer for Sustainable Energy and Air Quality.
Okay, right, so we, as councillors, we got a report taken to full council, the last council meeting before the budget one, where we had an opportunity to debate, but this was always on the agenda that we would get a report back to Scrutiny so that Scrutiny can run an eye over it. When we first started the year, we had a number of conversations when Councillor Walshaw and Councillor Hearn at the time took over, and we had a general debate. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass over to Polly, who I think is going to do a presentation setting out what's happening, and we will then ask again. Polly, is it best to ask questions at the end of the presentation, or do you want them as you go along?
Probably at the end is easier, isn't it?
So I'll pass over to you, Polly.
Okay.
Thank you.
So there's two parts to the session. So one is just to give sort of a wrap up and a summary of the SEAC, but then Councillor Anson also asked me to look at a question from the LGA. So the presentation is more around the LGA side, and then I'll just give a general overview of the SEAC side, if that's okay. So if I start with the SEAC side, so in terms of what we've delivered over the last year, we've increased public engagement. It's given a real opportunity to bring the general public in and see what work's going on, but also to take more of a whole city approach and to invite businesses, community events, community groups, and also, you know, even to the extent that we've had individuals who've come up with amazing ideas. We've got a resident in Boston Spa who's come up with an idea that could just wipe sort of carbon out of the whole of the country, and we've had the opportunity to bring that to the forefront and try and help him get that idea to be taken seriously. We've also had the opportunity to attract greater media attention, which is really important on this agenda, because as we always said when we declared the climate emergency, it's not about what the council can do, it's about how we get everybody on board and bring everyone along. So actually that public engagement and media side is a really important strand for this. It's also through the working groups and through the main committee, we have brought in lots of external experts, and the importance of that is the fact that they're actually kind of bringing us all up to speed as officers and also as members, so that when we're doing our day-to-day work and taking decisions, actually people are really well informed. So even within the last probably month, we've heard from people on soil management and soil as a carbon store. We've heard about vertical farming and how that can help within the city in terms of green skills. And then we've made sure through that group that climate emergency remains a key priority. So over the last year, you know, lots of people have been pulled off day jobs doing other things, and, you know, work has stopped in certain areas. But despite everything that's gone on with COVID and what we've done as a city, we have still kept going in terms of COVID, in terms of the climate emergency. And not only that, but we've actually managed to secure, it must be coming up to sort of 40–45 million pounds for the city to deliver this year in terms of retrofitting on housing and our own public sector estate. And that's only been done through the commitment that's been shown by the council and the team that's been in place, which isn't repeated in a lot of other councils. The working groups have also had the opportunity to look at sort of strategies and policies that have come along and to challenge them, and to make sure that by the time they get to exec board, they've had wider member engagement, cross-party member engagement, and they've also had that kind of helpful challenge. We've had open forum where people have been able to come in and express their views on a number of issues, and it's really helpful to stay in touch with what the general public are thinking and where they feel. I've got a child asking you what he's having for lunch, believe it or not. Apologies.
They always know the right time to ask the questions.
They do indeed.
We're all wondering the same thing.
So anyway, that wasn't in the slightest bit distracting. Yeah, and then we've also had kind of great youth engagement, and we've heard from sort of young people in schools. We launched our Leeds by Example website over the last year, and just within the last week, we launched the youth page, and we had the opportunity to see how that's been received, and it just gives that focus and that outward looking place. So that, I think, is a kind of summary of SEAC and what we've achieved, and I think the positivity it brings to the whole climate change agenda. And then, Councillor Anderson, I think you got the slides from the LGA, which was just how Scrutiny as a function should be looking and questioning the climate emergency team generally. Yes. You just asked me if I could run through them. So if I just share my screen. Right, so, okay, we'll just go through the questions. Hopefully everyone can see that. So the first question was, how well does the council understand the need to take action locally? I think, it's fair to say that over the last, or since we declared a climate emergency, that has been fairly visible. And when the climate emergency was declared, the whole point about doing the big Leeds climate conversation was about that local action, local engagement, resident involvement. And the number of local low carbon projects and initiatives, ranging from the district heating to the retrofitting, to our electric bike scheme, to our electric van scheme, and that kind of, passion in terms of trying to always be at the forefront of those funding opportunities, I think shows that is well understood. In terms of the council's leadership champion and direct action, it's not on there, but it should be in terms of the SEAC committee's role. It's a bit of an oversight there. And also the fact that we have got an appointed cabinet member who's got responsibility for climate change, directly within their job title. And we've also embedded it in terms of our kind of core reports and things that come through on exec board and procurement and other key decisions that are coming through. So I think there's always that opportunity for kind of, from a member point of view, director point of view, to have real visibility about how decisions are going to impact on the climate emergency. So the third question is, how is the council adopting a clear and detailed strategic plan, and how is it mainstreaming climate change mitigation and adaptation? It's an interesting one, because I think our focus, if we're honest, is always about the sort of action against climate change rather than necessarily adaptation. So adaptation is really a real focus on flood, but then if we think about the city, that is probably the key climate risk to us as a city, so that is probably the right focus. And as you know, there's been a lot of work done on flood alleviation, there's been a lot of capital invested in it. In terms of the plans, we report annually to the executive board, and that report was attached. We also work with the Leeds Climate Commission, who help us in terms of looking at our roadmap and looking at whether we're on track, what actions we need to take, what needs to be prioritised. So I think that is there. I think the climate change is adaptation is there, but more on the flood side. The fourth question was about the council reviewing its investment strategy, supply chains and procurement models. In terms of the procurement side, I think there's a lot that's been done. It's in the guidance. There's more being done in terms of the social value guidance that's currently being issued. There's also some work happening at a West Yorkshire level to look at more kind of embedded carbon, so carbon that's in materials. So we will also benefit from that. And the highways function is already starting to look at that when they're doing their big schemes and starting to get that measured. It's probably not something that's particularly well established nationally. So we're kind of working with people to help that be brought along. How is the council integrating sustainability and resilience in its transport and energy plan? So the transport strategy, I think carbon is absolutely at the heart of it. It's out for consultation at the moment and went to exec board at the end of last year. In terms of energy plan, we don't have a written energy plan as such, but we do have the large scale district heating scheme that we report at executive board. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we've secured a significant amount of funding, so we'll be installing solar panels and decarbonising heat through air source heat pumps at a lot of our properties. And we've made the commitment about the decarbonisation of the council itself by 2025. So sorry, 50%, I should say, of our emissions by 2025. How is the council planning to adapt existing properties and estates? And this again is more about the resilience to, you know, the impacts of climate change. And our focus has been more on retrofitting and making them more carbon efficient. But again, really the key thing at this moment in time is really around the flood alleviation. There is work going on at hopefully everyone's seen about the launch of the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission. And one of the key strands that they will pick up is actually the resilience side. And that will start to look at things like urban heating effects, food resilience, resilience of infrastructure. But the flooding is probably the one that's kind of the most sort of the nearest risk for us. So it's right we concentrate on that, but we have got an eye on the other effects that could help hit us. So in terms of promoting climate education, diversifying the labour market and focusing on sectors that are sustainable. So I think there's been quite a lot done on communication engagement. I'd say last year that probably came away a bit because COVID was obviously at sort of front and centre of all comms that the council did. However, despite that, we still did a significant number of press releases, things across our social media. We've established our website. I mentioned about the youth guidance, and that's got lots of educational links. We've also joined with a national campaign, or sorry, actually I should have said international campaign, which is Counters In, and there's a number of linked activities with that. And we're also planning a programme of climate literacy training for internal staff that should have happened last year but was delayed because of COVID. And then at the Yorkshire and Humber level, we're looking at setting up a green skills group, which will focus on the work that's been done on just transition, but look to start to turn that into more of a practical action plan. And we will very much part of supporting that. And we always look at the job side of any of the things that we do. So in terms of the recent funding we've won, you know, there's a big part of that is about what green jobs is that actually creating. This was quite a strange or a difficult question in a way. What measures are being taken to ensure that health and social care systems will be resilient with the extra pressures of climate change? I'm not sure that we've specifically done anything on that. I also think it would, you know, maybe a little bit premature at the moment as well, in terms of, you know, the extent. It would probably be no different to the cold weather response that we take, you know, but it might be a hot weather response if you were getting into hotter temperatures. So I'm not so sure that there is a massive amount to do on that at the moment, but maybe when we start doing the resilience work with Yorkshire and Humber, I might change my view. And then it asked about those who are most at risk and what's being done to assist the most vulnerable. So there's a vulnerability index that's been created by the University of Leeds by Paula Sakai, and actually she presented it really recently to the Food and Biodiversity Working Group, and also the wider SEAC committee were invited to come and look at that. And although that's not an index that's specifically about individuals, it's about areas. And in a way, I think that's maybe more important at the moment from a council point of view. Because actually the council needs to be aware which areas are more at risk and then be able to work with those areas in a strategic way rather than individuals, because at the moment I don't think there is such a risk at an individual level, and it's more about how we put the plans in place at that kind of local level, and we try and make sure there aren't areas of the city that are more vulnerable. And then just repeating that point about flooding. And the last question is, how is the council supporting and working with all relevant private and civic actors in the area towards climate change mitigation and adaptation? So the Leeds Climate Commission is kind of at the centre of that work. It, you know, it was set up to bring together all the different actors from around the city, private, public, third sector, and then the Regional Climate Commission will also add to that. And you know, and there have been things such as business breakfast, Anchor Institute meetings and things. So that there is work going on in that. We supported the Child Friendly Leeds business ambassadors event recently. So I think the stable part of it is probably the Climate Commission, but we always support other events. I'm supporting Leeds Trinity business event next week. So there's kind of lots of more reactive things that happen as well. So I'll leave it there and stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So, right. So who would like to go first in terms of asking questions on what we've had presented to us just now? Anybody wanting to lead off on anything? I can't see any hands, any yellow hands or blue hands going up. I can't see anyone give me any signals that mean that they want to speak. I mean, well, yes, Councillor Bentley.
Sorry, Chair, I don't know what happened there. I kept pressing the button and nothing happened. Just a very quick question, really, to Polly. A couple of years ago, and a number of members may remember this, there was a lot of talk about the move to hydrogen, replacing methane, natural gas with hydrogen. And Northern Gas Networks came and did a number of presentations telling us how they were making the city ready for hydrogen by replacing all the old pipes and putting in plastic piping, etc., and how Leeds could be sort of a ring fenced as a use of hydrogen. There's still a lot of talk about hydrogen, but that particular issue about Northern Gas Networks proposals, which was converting natural gas to hydrogen and then piping it into Leeds, seems to have dropped off the radar a bit. So I just wonder if Polly could update us on that.
Neil might want to come in as well on this, but I don't think it's dropped off the radar. I think they're at the phase where they're doing a couple of years of testing. So they had to go to government, get the support to actually do the physical testing of the system, and that's where they are. But I mean, if you look at the Prime Minister's 10-point plan pre-Christmas, there was money set aside for a hydrogen town. So it was quite small scale investment. So there is still work going on both nationally and locally around hydrogen. But I think they're at a kind of testing phase, and I think there's also probably more of a need for a national government policy and support in order to get it to that next phase. So I don't know if Neil wants to say any more on it, because he's been working more closely with the hydrogen side.
Yeah, there continues to have been work over this last couple of years, Councillor Bentley, and they have attracted quite a lot of extra research money to do all the testing, trying to blow up pipes and so forth to make sure that it is actually safe to actually put in people's houses. And actually, I think there is going to now be a pilot scheme in Gateshead, actually, around a number of homes. I think where it'd be fair to say, I think the focus is switched to a more of a regional basis rather than a purely Leeds basis, because I think it probably works on that grander scale. I think the other bit which is in an interesting development is I know one of the concerns people had was that it isn't a complete decarbonisation in a way. You'd have to do all the carbon storage, but by if you went through the process which Northern Gas Networks previously outlined. But I think there is some progress on what's called green hydrogen, and it's effectively using renewable electricity to separate separate the carbon from to separate water into hydrogen. So there's a lot of work on it. I think the jury's still out as to what proportion of the energy of heat will be provided through hydrogen as against renewable energy delivering electricity. We will have to see over the next couple of years how that split goes. but it's very much still on the agenda. And in fact, I would say probably higher up the agenda than it was a couple of years ago in terms of a feasible option.
Can I come back, Chair?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I appreciate it's still on the agenda, but in a very sort of broad sense, I think it'd be useful to have an update, if we could, of what's happening with this, particularly in view of the way it was sort of sold and trumpeted a couple of years ago. Interestingly, I understand that the hydrogen town or test sites that have been set up in Gateshead are not addressing the carbon capture and storage. It's only the use, effectively the domestic and industrial use of hydrogen, and they are manufacturing that, but ignoring the emissions that it will create. So I think there's still, as you say, a lot of work to be done on that aspect of it. But thanks. But it'd be useful to have an update, I think. Thanks, Neil and Polly.
Right. Councillor Walshaw's indicated, but Councillor Dawson indicated as well, and also so that she has some prior notice. Where's she gone? Oh, yeah, Dawn. Dawn, can you update the board on the work that you're doing in the group that you chair, the subgroup of SEAC? But so Councillor Dawson, then Councillor Walshaw, and then I'll ask Councillor Collins if she can update the group on the work that she's leading on.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of issues to raise. The first one is about electrical charging points. As we try to approach the tipping point to move over to electrical vehicles, there's been a lot of talk in the media about on-street parking, and I'd like to know how we are doing as an authority compared to other authorities, where this seems to be very high profile. And to get to that tipping point of people moving to electric vehicles, I think we need to be in a position where we support people who don't have private gardens, driveways, where they can have a charging point and where they have to charge on the street. So I assume this is very similar to having parking meters. You know, we have charging points on the street, and I'd like to see us make progress. And I believe maybe our grants available. And the second issue I was just going to mention was, Paul referred to it in a presentation about community engagement. And I think one of the great ways of engaging the community is helping in the planting of trees, which absorb the carbon, as we know. And our plan to do 5.8 million trees in Leeds is a great opportunity to engage everybody. And can the council facilitate this groups of people, and maybe through community committees doing this? I say it on the basis that one of the few things that brought myself and Councillor Finnegan together is actually planting trees in Dartmouth Park. And there are some trees with our name on them, I'm pleased to say.
Thank you. Right. There, Polly.
Yeah, so if you start with the electric charging, so there's been quite a lot done on electric charging, and there's different theories, I think, in terms of how that best works. So I suppose the argument is that people don't have a petrol station outside their home, and you know, so we have lots of requests from residents to put charge points outside their houses, but we also have equal number of requests from people not to do that because of the amount of space it takes up in terms of active travel, people being able to walk, having cables across pavements. And so one of the things that we're starting to look at more is about having hubs within communities, so that people don't have one outside their home, but they probably have more local access. We've secured various amounts of funding to help. So we've got things like the Anjou Charge Point Network that's free up to October, and has already issued 1 million megawatts of electricity across the region, half of which was in Leeds. We've also got some vehicle to grid charging points, which is where it balances with the house. We've got charging points that we're trying within the council where you just drive over them and they charge the vehicle. So we're trying lots of these new technologies. But you're right that it needs to move into more of a sort of steady state. And we're just in discussions with Highways at the moment about how we do that and how we get to the point where we can license. And a lot of that will come through private investment rather than via the council. where private investors come in, and there's a lot of appetite to do that. And I think we just need to make sure we've got the building blocks in place to enable that. So that is a really live issue at the moment that you're right, we do need to resolve in the next couple of months so that we're kind of ready for business.
Okay, thank you. Right, now I'm going to invite Councillor Walshaw to address this. Then I'm going to bring in Councillor Collins, then Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you, Chair. Working in these two committees is always a pleasure to have incredible offer support from the likes of Polly and Neil. And Polly's gone into what we're doing in great and real detail, so I don't need to go over that. It's been a very successful first 18 months for SEAC, and I'm very pleased with the work that's been done. One of our roles, really, I think, is to be sort of a two-way street between people of Leeds and all the amazing ideas they have, and what we're trying to do as a city council. And we found a lot of people with a wealth of knowledge in Leeds on this incredibly important agenda. But one of our key roles is trying to communicate to the people of Leeds, to everyone in the council and more widely, and to government. It's just the sheer scale of the problem and the challenge that it presents. To give you some idea, what we now know about the challenges facing Leeds as of February 2021 is a couple of orders of magnitude greater than we knew 2 years ago. So, for example, and this is going to probably stun and shock people, but and it should make us sit up and think, is that to retrofit the housing stock of Leeds, we've done the sums, will cost somewhere between £6 to £8 billion to make that housing effectively carbon neutral, zero carbon housing. That's £6 to £8 billion. Now, at the present time, I don't think anyone in the country is quite prepared for the scale of this and what that means. One of our roles going forward is to communicate to government and to Westminster writ large is just the sheer nature of change that they're going to have to face, and they're going to have to enable cities like Leeds to be dynamic and to lead on this. So to give us, as you well know, Chair, it always breaks down to money and powers, doesn't it? And there's going to have to be some real hard thinking in Westminster and Whitehall about just what that means. We're going to try to be very vocal over the rest of this year as I was about to say return to a normal, but as we embrace a new normal, I think probably the best way of putting it, Chair, because we are building up to COP26, and that's an incredibly important event in Glasgow towards the end of this year. Britain's hosting that. It's really important that we set out our stage to be carbon neutral by, we think, 2030. The government says currently 2050, but actually, really, we need to be looking at 2030. And what I would just say is, WICE is also, Chair, doing an awful lot of good work. So regarding to Councillor Bentley's questions about hydrogen, if I could look to WICE's Green Economy panel, they're doing a lot of work on the hydrogen economy for Yorkshire and Humber. And it's interesting, in the 18 months that I've been involved in that panel, Chair, the discussion has moved very, very firmly on, it appears, away from the brown hydrogen proposals of Northern Gas Networks onto a green hydrogen economy based, where the hydrogen is produced using renewable electricity. The hydrogen is then used in whatever form it needs to be used in, and then it's a virtuous circle, Chair, I think, and that's what we're really aiming to get to, where we can have that more circular type approach. Also, just remind members that the council's deployed its deployed. What a great phrase! The council's brought about it's tree hatchery, it's treery at the Arium. I'm not sure treery is actually a word. But that'll enable us to have the capacity to do all this tree planting. And that noise you can hear is my huskies barking, who's just woken up. So with that, Chair, happy to cover any and all questions, but I'm just going to mute while I let her out.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Collins, do you want to outline to the work that you're doing on behalf of the city?
Yes, thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd just like to thank all of the officers who regularly attend our working group meetings, as well as Polly and her team. We've also had a lot of people from planning and parks and countryside that come and join in the debates, really. And I think it's quite important to have officers at these working group meetings, because one thing we have learnt is if we're going to progress things and make significant changes in the future, we need to have policies put into place, policies that are practical, as well as achievable, so that people outside the council know what our commitment is, and also these policies will guide them legally as well as politely in the right direction. So that's my key point, is to thank all of the officers who regularly attend, and please plead with them to do so, to continue to do so. The first few meetings that we had, we were very heavily focused on trees and trees planting. And if Councillor Dawson would like to join our working group, there's an open invitation for all councillors there. You don't have to be part of the committee. Just let Polly know and she will send you any future invitations. So when we were looking at trees, we were looking at finding sites for planting trees within the council, and what we were doing to support the White Rose Forest Initiative. Out of that, it did become clear that we don't have enough council land. Even if we planted every square inch of council land with trees, we still don't think it's enough. And I do agree that we need some support from government regarding finding private land. But I think there is also an awful lot the council could be doing, sort of leading the way, really, talking to private landowners and seeing whether there's some way that we can incentivise them to actually plant trees on their own land. I know recently we've had a couple of planning applications in Horsforth where developers have said, we'd like to give you some money to plant some trees. And as local ward councillors, we've said to those developers, that's not the issue. The issue is we need you to buy the land, even if it's not on your development site, so that you can actually put the trees in place, not just keep giving us money, because it's not the purchasing of the trees that's the issue, it's the finding the land. More recently, we've moved on to food. We've had several discussions about what our priorities should be. We've all acknowledged that working with local people regarding allotments and giving them the opportunity to grow food is one of the things we could be doing. There's a lot we would need to support local people with regarding training and education. I mean, we're not all born gardeners. Most of us learn from our peers or our parents. And where you don't have that opportunity, I think that's a hole that the council could plug. We've also had some experts come in and discuss with us about vertical farming on a commercial basis. We do know that from those presentations, there are other countries in the world who have started to look at vertical farming. I think the prime leader at the moment is Japan. But vertical farming does flag up a lot of issues, because you've got to have the power to generate the heating, you've got to have power to generate the light, you've got to look at the water that you're using and whether you recycle that or how you gain that in the first place. So it's a very new method of farming. So not even the experts from the university could at the moment say how we should start that. But they are looking at doing a project at the moment and are hoping to come back to us in 6 months' time on that. More recently, we've had a meeting where we looked at soil quality. And again, this is where policies come in. One thing we flagged up was that developers of housing estates don't usually care about what they've put in under the 1 inch of turf that they've put in the garden. And whether there's something we could do regarding policies as to look at the quality of the soil and the land that's left behind, so that if a new homeowner does wish to actually develop it into a growing a food allotment, then they have the opportunity to do that without too much worry about what spanners, bolts, bricks, concrete, what else they find under the grass. We've also started looking at working with partners regarding food procurement. And one question that did flag up at our last meeting earlier this week, was who's actually setting the menus for a lot of our schools and the other organisations we procure food for, because maybe that is where we need to start. to see whether we can actually change the menus without people noticing slightly, so that the procurement team can actually get more food from locally sourced farmers, rather than actually buying the high value carbon footprint foods such as pineapples, melons that need to be flown into the country, rather than can be grown and developed around the corner. So we've done a lot, Chair. We've still got a very strong working group team, and hopefully we'll do a lot more.
Yeah, but no, thank you for that. And I think what Councillor Collins has proved is how cross-party the administration have, effectively said to Councillor Collins, here's an area, you lead on it. And I think it shows the council in a good light in terms of the cross-party work that is being done. So I've got Councillor Blackburn and then Councillor Smith. So Councillor Blackburn first, please.
Sorry, Chair, yes, I'm here now.
Yeah.
My concern is that, though of course I'm in favour of planting trees, my concern is actually who is going to maintain them once they grow, because we know that yes, there can be problems there. I know the council doesn't have enough officers at the moment to deal with the trees we've got, and that's obviously on council land I'm talking about, but also private developers, where they put trees in and then, well, it's an awkward matter of who deals with them afterwards, unless there is somebody's garden, if it's on a piece of spare land, so it's a bit awkward. But my main concern is on the council land. So yes, we want trees, but I want to know that there's council.
Councillor Walshaw has unmuted himself, which indicates to me that he's going to try and answer that question.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Councillor Blackburn, for your question. I mean, there are two answers to this. The first one is trees are quite good at maintaining themselves in the short to medium term. Longer term, and we have to think longer term as always with climate, we're going to have to look at how we maintain our new public forest, if you like, Chair. That's a challenge for us, but I think it's one we have to rise to meet. But I think it's really up to us as a council to lead by example and demonstrate that we can get a lot more trees in Leeds, and we are doing that. But it's also through planning policies. And one thing to add, Chair, we are at the moment midway through a climate emergency focused local plan review, which will have within it an awful lot of elements of biodiversity within it. As I've said in the council chamber and at SEAC, I'm fairly confident we can shape the future of what's new to come, Chair, what's going to be new to build in Leeds, and that includes a strong biodiversity element. My concern is, and I'll use this moment as a reminder, is the retrofit of the existing is the thing that gives me great pause. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Polly?
Just to say on a kind of really practical basis, in terms of the funding that's been set aside for the trees specifically on council land, that kind of maintenance programme is built into that to allow for kind of maintenance in the first couple of years, and then at the point that they have to be thinned. So that is built into the Parks and Countryside programme to maintain. So hopefully that provides some comfort.
Thank you. Councillor Smith, and then I've got Councillor Collins has indicated as well. So Councillor Smith first.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to bang the planning drum, I'm afraid. I know we're doing a lot. I know we are doing a lot. We've been, we're following a lot of what we can do. I'm just wondering if that is enough. I sit on a plans panel, and regularly applications come before us that we condition to include things like rainwater butts, the porous driveways, things along those lines. I'm wondering if if we are having a planning policies review, could we almost build those in as a kind of standard, as a minimum, or you know, something equal? I just wonder if it, you know, if the developers were aware of what was expected of them, they could build that into their costings, and we would get stronger applications at first bat. So that was my thought. Thank you.
Polly beat Neil to the draw that time, so Polly first and then Neil.
I think just to say that the local plan side is going to exec board, I think, in March, and then it will go to sort of consultation. But the sort of things that Councillor Smith has indicated are certainly being looked at and have been discussed in the Food and Biodiversity Working Group as kind of minimums, and also we've linked up planning colleagues with some of the university experts to try and help them develop their policies more fully and to take into account resilience as well as climate mitigation. So
that's right. Neil, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to demonstrate that everything comes around to planning eventually, Chair. But yeah, Councillor Smith, you're right. We, as Polly said, we're looking from the very sort of micro issues all the way through to the very large issues with the local plan review. That's, yes, as Polly said, it's going to executive board in March and then consultation. Hoping to see a lot of input from Leeds elected members on that. There's a lot to be said. We're asking a lot of open questions. There isn't anything we won't consider. There's very strong political state to the planning service to be as bold and as radical as they feel that they have to meet the challenges we know the city faces. So I'm looking forward to it. There's a lot going on. It's going to be an exciting year in terms of planning. It's about as exciting as planning can get, I think, Chair. But I think addressing climate emergency is central to everything we're doing as a council with regards to planning. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Gabriel.
I just wanted to put something on the chat line, and it says the chat line's disabled. I wanted to ask Polly if she'd include me in invites to Councillor Collins' meetings, please.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Yes, we've got a note of that. All right. So I think we've had a good. Oh, sorry, Councillor Collins. I forgot about you. Yes, Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. I won't take it personally. I just wanted to come back to Councillor Blackburn's question, really, because we have discussed maintenance at the working group meetings regarding the trees. And what was really concluded is that there isn't one answer for all trees. As well as the food, we've also got biodiversity to consider on our remit as well. So the trees are being planted because they take carbon out of the air, but we also want to ensure that there are a lot of these large planted areas that are sort of really left to naturalise, because they will actually improve the biodiversity and with those areas as well. So I think every site that's developed and planted up with trees needs to be considered in its own merits, really, as to what we're going to do in the future to maintain them. A lot of people assume that if we've got a green site, then people will be able to walk their dogs all over these sites. I think one thing that we've established within the working group is we've got to start setting aside areas where we can just leave them alone and let wildlife and nature take its course as well. Obviously, that doesn't work with a small site. You need the bigger sites. But just to sort of reiterate what Polly has said, is Parks have committed to looking after their trees, but on a lot of locations, and maybe in the private locations in the future, maybe the best thing to do is to just let them go wild.
Thank you. Mr. Evans?
Yeah, so just a couple of points. I mean, just in terms of this board, the issue which Councillor Walshaw has raised about the retrofit of housing obviously almost falls to this board in terms of its housing side, and clearly it'd be interesting for you to look at what we are doing in relation to our own stock, and there's some fantastic work going on around retrofit at the moment, and obviously the district heating which you've heard about, but the ground source heat pumps which are going into some of our multis are making an incredible difference actually. So it's worth looking at that. But the biggest conundrum is actually the private stock. And you've heard something a bit about the rented stock. but actually the biggest element is actually owner-occupier. And clearly as a council, we tend to focus rightly on issues around fuel poverty, but actually the biggest carbon users are actually the people with the most money with the biggest houses. And actually that we haven't kind of got a grip on at all as a country, really. And clearly there's the voucher scheme which has been launched, but that has not been a success to date. So that's something which, you know, really stands as a huge challenge. Owner occupation, and particularly, I say, people who one would expect to make a contribution to actually reducing carbon usage. The other point I was going to make, issue in terms of vulnerability, I think the interpretation of that was about, you know, people being affected by flood, but actually the most immediate vulnerability is people being actually affected by changes to the economy as a consequence of carbon. And people have heard the Ellesmere Port story this morning with cars, and that's going to run right through this decade. You know, actually from big stories like that, you know, to frankly looking at something like our own services. We have a fleet services which was set up to look after the combustion engine. We've now nearly got all electric vans, and it needs a different group of people and a different set of skills. And that only will go for, you know, going back to Councillor Bentley's question about hydrogen, it will go into gas fitters. You know, what's going to be their future? Much depends on what sort of mix we end up with. So actually, anticipating the sort of low carbon economy which we will have in advance, and actually thinking about who is going to be vulnerable to that change. And we have been doing kind of work on that, and then, you know, really having to look at how do we reskill the population in order to actually meet the new demands is really going to be critical, both in terms of actually meeting our targets, but actually also in actually gaining public support and ensuring that people aren't left behind by such a revolution in the way that we deliver energy. So yeah, I just thought I'd mention that and kind of put that on that on the agenda.
Thank you very much. Right, so to try and pull all of this together, can I thank the officers and Councillor Walshaw for presenting today. Hopefully Councillor Hayden has now seen the task that is in front of her and that she's going to have to work for, and, you know, can I wish her all the best. The things I would pull together is, I do think, because of how dynamic this is going to be, we should maybe look to recommending to the successor board that we get update reports every 6 months, because things are now going to be progressing and moving along, and I think the scrutiny board needs to keep an eye on what's happening. I do think that the point about the green economy needs to be made, and we need to keep a watching brief on that. But also, I do think we need to notify Councillor Trustwell or Councillor Trustwell's successor board that it's something that they need to be looking into from the work that they are doing. And the retrofitting of houses, yes, I think that is something that we have got to take an eye on, because if the figure is 6 billion, you know, 7 billion, whatever it comes out to be, because one of the things that is concerning me is that we're building a whole lot of new houses, and we may end up having to retrofit some of them, because which brings me on to the planning issue. I accept what's been said, but it would be good if we could try and get some of the developers to volunteer to bring forward more green and climate related changes, rather than having to wait on legislation or the council to have to do it, and letting plans panels know whether or not the developer has or has not moved in that direction. For those of you who are on plans panels, you'll hear a number of us going on about policies EN1 and EN2, and which is basically improving it by X%, the various things by X%. So I do think we need to keep a watching brief on how that's happening and how many developers are volunteering to come in. But what I'll do is I will leave the last few words to Councillor Walshaw, who did indicate when I was saying what I was saying about planning, and then I will bring this item to an end. Councillor Walshaw.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Don't worry, folks. I'll be brief. We somewhat interrupted by COVID. Myself and Councillor Mulherrin had set up a climate emergency developers working group to bring on board the developers who understand this agenda and are already, most of them, active participants in that. And that was interesting. We got sort of quite a range of people involved. Perhaps the more environmentally minded developers who joined in, such as City, wouldn't be surprised, but we actually got quite a broad range of developers, not just the high-end green type ones, and that was really pleasing. And what we've said to them is we want to have sort of a transparent, open process where they can demonstrate good practice. We can then communicate that to the rest of the industry to bring the less aware developers on. I don't want to say the bad developers, that sounds a touch pejorative, but we all know that there are developers who fight any kind of what they would see as additional cost tooth and nail. Well, actually, these aren't additional costs. These are the very necessary costs of building resilient housing. But it does remain the fact that at the moment, houses are being built that we will need to retrofit. Society, as a society, will need to retrofit, and that's enormously concerning. But to give members some peace of mind, we are trying to turbocharge as much as humanly possible the local plan process. However, we are having to work through statutory instruments, which, Chair, you've heard me say on many occasions, are sort of, they're clunky and they need a review in and of themselves, but we are trying to navigate them as soon as possible. I hope that's of some reassurance.
So thank you all, and thank you very much for your contributions to this particular item. Time is moved on. So in terms of item 9 on the work schedule, you've saw what's going to be happening. We've got one final meeting in March for the year, at which Becky will be pulling together a number of strands and presenting them to us. We have a working group meeting on the 10th of March, where we will be talking about the use of fireworks in terms of the antisocial use of it. That was a working group, so that will not be in public on this occasion, but the final public meeting of the year is on the 25th of March at 10:30. Becky, is there anything I haven't covered that I should have covered?
No, you've covered everything, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, so in that case, can I thank you all very much for coming along today and giving your time. And Councillor Dawson, thank you for the time you've given up. Again, if you are interested in substituting again, I'm sure Councillor Mulherrin may be willing to do so. But thank you all very much.
Hopefully, Lisa will be here next time. Hopefully. Thank you.
See you later. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.